This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Today we cover the Mercedes-Benz EQ SUV. We cover the Goldman Sachs downgrade of Tesla. And then we also, based on that downgrade, cover overall demand for SUVs or electric vehicles, shall we say. Thanks once again for joining us. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. If this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like and subscribe. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Now, I have to say that also please note your likes and comments are definitely helpful in the placement of our show, as well as we're on Patreon and could use your support there if possible. I wanted to note that the start of the day is that Mercedes-Benz introduced their EQ yesterday. It's a SUV that looks a lot like sort of an electric version of their SUV, and based on its introduction, there's a wow, that was an adventure. So Daimler-Benz has introduced a new SUV, and the suggestion by Goldman Sachs is going to be a category killer that really puts a hurting on Tesla. My overall assessment of the vehicle is that number one, having an SUV on the market is actually a really good idea. The reason is that one of the big changes in expensive places around the world is people can't afford to have 4 vehicles. So it turns out that 59% of the vehicles sold currently are SUVs. So the SUV size vehicle is a very important iteration of a vehicle. And I was actually a little disappointed that Tesla chose to do the Model 3 without it being an SUV, because if you look in China and around the world, the SUV segment is critical in terms of the flexibility you have with that vehicle. And Tesla's plan is the next vehicle after the truck and Roadster introduced is an SUV, and then the pickup truck. So I do think that it's an important iteration in terms of the nature of the vehicle being produced. You'll also notice that both Jaguar and Audi are delivering SUV style vehicles to the market, and that's no accident based on how important the category is across all vehicles. I would say the only drawback to the X is the fact that the Model X from Tesla is the fact that those doors require a certain body style that a lot of people aren't jazzed about, and that the new vehicle without those rear doors will have some flexibility in terms of how it's going to look, and therefore I think garner a lot more interest based on people finding it appealing what they're seeing, instead of, you know, something that's sort of spaceship looking-ish. Now, there are a lot of features that have been put in this vehicle that were highlighted. There's price, there are all these different issues. For me, the conclusion I read about it, and I would have to agree, is everything hangs on some data that was produced on customer response. So the customers have this perception that if you have 100 miles in range, 25% of the population is interested. If you have 300-mile range, 75% of the population is interested. Daimler-Benz is entering the fray at 200 miles range estimated for this vehicle. So 200 miles beats 100, but it's not 300. And does that mean 35–40% of the usable population out there is interested in that range? Because it still creates range anxiety issues that pop up. And so I think that it's a good start by Daimler-Benz, but I do believe that it's questionable if in fact you'll get broad scale adoption. I think the bigger issue relative to Daimler, and why Goldman made the assessment that lowered the stock price of Tesla after the announcement, is the fact that it really shows that there's an effort to bring out something new that's improving by the large manufacturers, and therefore there might be a little bit of worry that might be put out there. The final note on this is that this vehicle is being introduced, as is the Audi product, and these vehicles are scheduled to roll out in 2020, so that's still 2 model years away. And I'm intrigued by the fact that you're going to have probably 500,000 Teslas sold between now and 2020. And what's starting to happen is Tesla's developing a nice base of customers who have a relationship with Tesla in many different ways, and especially with the supercharger. And so I think that it's not only the introduction of the vehicle that's going to be critical. The next question for Daimler as well as Audi is, what does the charging network look like? I haven't seen where this is going to happen. Once there's a robust charging network for high-speed charging for the vehicle, that's when I'll say to myself, okay, we have competitors that start to impact, what Tesla's going to look like going to the future. And, it's going to make a big difference. The next thing that I want, so we'll come back to this sort of in our third segment of the show. The next segment I wanted to cover is Goldman Sachs reinitiated coverage of Tesla with a downgrade, anticipating a 30% loss of value down to $210 a share over the next 6 months. I think that I find it strange that they've gone to this. As you know, Goldman withdrew its coverage of Tesla based on the fact that they became a Tesla advisor on the possible buyout. That withdrawal was then dropped because Goldman no longer is an advisor and therefore can do research reports. And their latest research reports concluded that, what they did. Now, I'm intrigued because analysts have to be independent and they have to do what they feel is, what is right, and therefore they're making a statement. In the case of Goldman, I'm really sort of surprised because the core logic is issues of manufacturing and the introduction by Daimler. Owners of stock tend to look out 1, 2, 3, 4 years to see what's going on, to look at the stock. So, to some extent you could see Goldman's argument at Tesla doing poorly and driven by how competitors influence what's happening with the company. I am a little surprised at some of the data that's sort of flowing that sort of influences what Tesla's going to look like. One of the biggest issues that's lurking in my mind is what's going on with demand for the Model 3 domestically in the United States as well as in Europe and Asia. Why this is huge is that Tesla is working through its backlog of people who want to purchase the Model 3. The reviews have been excellent. There are a lot of folks that are getting the vehicle in the United States and happily doing so. Same thing Canada. It's my belief that in places like Europe, particularly Norway, the Model 3 is going to see twice the relative demand that you're seeing in the United States, especially as the price drops below $50,000. So I'm fascinated by what this means because I believe what's going to happen as of January when there's European deliveries that begin is that there are a lot of owners that are going to get their vehicles, and neighbors and friends and colleagues are going to see those vehicles, like them, and then even if they weren't on the reserve list, they're going to start buying. So what I believe is going to happen is that there's going to be an initial wave of vehicles arrive in Europe and Asia, and then once people realize that the car is great, it fits cities better than the Model S does, it's a little less price point, etc., you're going to see a second wave of demand, particularly in places where the cost of electricity is a lot lower than the $8 to $9 a gallon we're seeing in Europe. So hence, it's my belief then that what you're starting to see is, think about what happens with computers. One person gets a computer, and then instead of someone going to the store to learn about it, they get a ride from a friend, and then 2 people might get it. I believe that there's runway for Tesla relative to competitors to have those kind of customer relationships being built relative to the Model 3, and that already exists in the Model S and X. When you add things on there like the supercharger network and the ability, where I'm blown away by the number of owners I've read about with other electric vehicles that limit the driving range daily to 25 to 50 miles to avoid range anxiety. It's amazing the number of people have made sacrifices to make that work, and they won't have to sacrifice with Tesla given the range capabilities of the vehicle already and how the supercharger network supports that process. So so interestingly, I think the EQ is a nice vehicle. I think it's just a start. I think they're waiting on battery capabilities that get them to 300 to 400 miles, so there'll be no range anxiety from customers, and it expands the base of people willing to spend that much money for a vehicle that can go a decent distance and not head over to Tesla immediately. So I really don't think it's much of a threat. Hence, I don't think it's much of an impactor on the stock or sales that the company might experience. The next thing I wanted to cover is what I call the demand end of the equation. So what's basically happening is I've consistently said that I'm surprised that US owners buy Teslas because the effective cost of gas is about $1 a gallon when you go electric, but it's approximately $2.60, $2.70 is what Americans are paying. The lower the oil prices, the less people are interested in electric vehicles here in the US and hybrids. Frankly, pickup truck and SUVs are doing well because we're at a $2.50 price rather than a $5 price for gasoline. And this brings up why I've been surprised by the demand in the US, which I think is ahead of what I expected. And that is that if you go to Europe, you're running $8, $9 a gallon. And people are able to pay off their vehicles with gas savings and others in places like Norway in a year and a half. So I'm fascinated by the fact that, hey, we haven't seen how demand reaction is in Europe to electric vehicles, but Europe is doing things that are not done in the US, like banning ICE vehicles or diesel vehicles on certain roads in Germany. Some of the incentives that we see in Norway, the Danish are doing a lot. So there's a lot of European activity relative to building up the volume. And so the reason why I think Tesla's demand is no problem is the fact that what is the usable marketplace? So in the United States, there's a certain percentage of people that are interested in electric vehicles for a bunch of reasons, but basically that number is impacted by the price of oil. When we go to places with high oil prices, this is when I believe the demand for the touchstones of pollution reduction, the fact that electric cars are a better value when it comes to $1 a gallon versus $8 a gallon when it comes to fuel, and then some of the other incentives of ICE engines in the center of cities. I believe that the size of the marketplace in other places for Tesla makes the concern of a few sales going to competitors irrelevant. I believe the size of the marketplace to draw in more users from Tesla is huge in other places in the United States, and therefore I don't see there being a problem whatsoever with Tesla's stock price driven by reduction of sales from competitors. In fact, one of the reasons Tesla has open patents and many of those competitors are using Tesla's methods to deliver those vehicles is that Tesla is trying to boost the number of vendors that offer electric vehicles to impact its mission statement of the move to electricity, but they also recognize that if an efficient move to electricity is done across a number of makes, the size of the market is huge, and we're seeing that demand already with Tesla, and folks like Goldman Sachs are implying that Tesla is in trouble based on all of this. I'd say I think it's ridiculous, and I think we'll see that in the production numbers, etc. The thumbnail I'm choosing to use this week that you'll see is related to the fact that there's a huge number of Model 3s that have arrived in our local area, and that's the photo that I've chosen. So you're seeing trade-ins along with Model 3s, etc. in the thumbnail chosen, and we're posting more photos, as you know, on our Tesla Fan Insight Facebook page. The final thing I wanted to cover today is Elon Musk has an interesting management style. He has if a note comes from you in Twitter or an email, he'll put WTF next to it and forward it to executives in charge of that area. I find it interesting because Elon Musk has been sort of involved with Tesla for 10 years. And in his previous iterations, he really was the tech guy, CEO, and now he's having to deal with a large number of employees. And there are a lot of challenges with how working with large number of employees in a manufacturing setting changes the dynamics that you do not see when it comes to a software setting where you just have a lot of really smart engineers around you. So I really think he has growing pains going on in terms of effective control. I mean, having a flat management process where all folks can send you memos and so forth is good, but once you get to 40,000 employees, those size numbers now makes it more difficult to interact with everyone efficiently. And I really look forward to him working out a process where, he really tries to create layers of management and manages the workflow better so he doesn't have to burn himself out in the process of trying to address 40,000 people by himself across all the issues that might pop up across the company. I see that we're moving towards the end of our time here. It's Wednesday, the 5th of September 2018. We'll soon have earnings numbers to look at, and we're getting back into our some new developments in trucks that we'll be covering in our next show, which we're looking forward to bringing you on Friday. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Please remember, take a look at the 5-2 diet as well as the paleo diet. I just did my 20 leg lifts per leg to strengthen quad muscles, to reduce the chance of knee replacement issues in terms of how those quads help lock the knees in if you do that exercise. Wanted to encourage you to do that because I'm doing it myself. Thank you for all those folks who've also mentioned that I should really try the less meat or no meat diet. I've been going that route, and it's a slow process, and I appreciate all of your encouragement down that lane, and definitely feeling better as a result. Any rate, I'm definitely looking forward to all of your comments, particularly your opinions on the new Mercedes and its impact on Tesla. Also, wanted to thank you guys for bringing up certain topics because we can blend them into the show as we notice that there are some things that people are asking about in terms of what's going on. We've already covered this in a show, but there's one person that asked, why is it Tesla's heading to bankruptcy if they're producing 5,000 vehicles a month? The answer is Solar City and other debt-related items that were brought forward means that there's a lot of debt that Tesla's enduring, where, for example, Solar City's sales are really down, and those lower sales against the debt that they produced means that the cars have to cover debt related to issues not car related. So, there is a lot of debt there, and we're all hopeful that they can make it through, this tough squeeze and produce more to have those profits cover, everything needed to keep the company in its current operating flow without any hiccups. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. Please remember to like and subscribe. All comments appreciated. We're on Patreon, could use your support. The link is listed below. Look forward to our next interaction. Tschüss in German, au revoir French, Lahitraot Hebrew, Choda Hafez Farsi, Farvel in my newest, I guess that is Dutch. And in Jamaica we say, Nof respect wa Goldman. Thanks once again for joining us, and have a great day.